A security captain, older, confident, authoritative, places a hand on the shoulder of a fresh-faced rookie nurse in scrubs. Around them, hospital staff move with the controlled urgency of a known threat. Security captain, calm, paternal, stay behind the rope. Let us handle this. The nurse nods. Compliant. Small. The kind of person you'd forget was there. Cut to chaos. Gunfire. Hallway. The rope is breached. Hospital security is pinned. Cut to the nurse. No expression. Surgical gloves removed. Hands moving with mechanical precision toward the stairwell. A headset emerges from the uniform pocket, tactical grade. The hospital smells the same every shift. Bleach. The metallic undertone of blood products in the walk-in cooler. The vague, clinical sweetness of saline solution. Maya Chun had been smelling it for 8 months. Long enough that the odor had stopped registering as anything other than the background of work. She was adjusting the 4-drip on bed 4 when the first anomaly registered. Not an emergency. Not yet. Just a change in air pressure, the way a room feels when too many people start moving at once with purpose. She didn't look up from the patient, Mr. Holloway, 63, post-op knee replacement, but her eyes tracked the movement in her peripheral vision. 2 hospital security officers walking quickly past the ICU entrance. Not running. Not yet. Walking like people who had received instructions. The second observation came 15 seconds later. The overhead page system activated with its standard 3-beep alert. But instead of a routine call for Dr. Patterson or a pharmacy delivery, there was a pause. Then a code lockdown announcement. Calm voice. Practiced tone. The kind used in drills so often that hearing it for real shouldn't have felt different that IT did. All personnel initiate code lockdown protocols. Secure your department. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Maya finished adjusting Mr. Holloway's drip. Her hands didn't hesitate, didn't tremble. She patted his shoulder. The gesture was gentle enough that it looked routine and moved to the next bed. Around her, the ICU began to fracture. A nurse named Rebecca stood frozen at the central station, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The respiratory therapist on the east side of the ward started moving faster, checking ventilators with the kind of urgency that looked useful but wasn't. He was performing panic for himself. Maya had seen that behavior before, though not in a hospital. Different contexts, different stakes. Same psychology. Dr. Amiri, the attending physician, appeared at the double doors to the ICU. He was already on his phone, saying something about contacting administration. His face had that particular shade of pale that meant his mind was 3 steps ahead, but his body didn't know which direction to move. Maya completed her check on bed 3. Mrs. Kowalski, stable, sedated, on a ventilator, and moved methodically to bed 2. Her movements were economical. Unnecessary gestures burned energy. Unnecessary energy created visibility. Right now, invisibility felt correct. The security captain appeared 7 minutes after the lockdown announcement. His name was Richard Volkov. 58 years old, retired state police. Working hospital security for the last 6 years because it was steady work and the hours were manageable. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to being the highest authority in a room. His uniform was pressed. His belt had weight to it. Radio, keys, a holstered department-issue Glock that Maya had seen him practice drawing exactly twice in the 8 months she'd worked here. He moved into the ICU with purpose, radioing something to the officers outside, then conducting a quick visual sweep of the room. His eyes moved across the space methodically, beds, exits, windows, personnel, and landed on Maya as she was double-checking the medications on the crash cart. Chun. He didn't ask. He stated, "Captain." She turned. Her posture was open but not rigid, compliant but not theatrical about it. "We have an active situation outside the building. Police are en route. We're establishing a secure perimeter, and I need all medical staff to stay in designated zones." He gestured to a specific area near the central station, about 15 feet from the exterior windows, roughly 10 feet from the secondary exit. "That's your zone." Behind the rope, he was already reaching into his duty bag, pulling out bright yellow caution tape, pulling out a command voice that had probably worked in every situation he'd encountered in the last 30 years. "You stay behind the rope. You do not approach windows. You do not leave this area. Let us handle what's outside. We're trained for this." "You're not." "Understood." Maya nodded. "Understood, Captain. Good." He turned, already moving to establish the perimeter with Dr. Amiri, who was now following his instructions without the appearance of having processed them. Maya returned to the crash cart. She ran her fingers along the medication inventory. 8B, atropine, amiodarone, sodium bicarbonate. Everything in order. Everything accessible in the right sequence. She noted the position of the defibrillator. She noted the secondary crash cart location. She noted the fire exit behind the oxygen storage unit, the one that most staff forgot existed because it opened into a stairwell and most people didn't think in terms of alternate exits. She noted how security Captain Volkov had positioned his tape line and how it would restrict sight lines to the eastern windows but create a bottleneck at the single entry point if anyone needed to move quickly in either direction. Around her, Rebecca was still frozen. Dr. Amiri was pacing. The respiratory therapist was checking ventilators again, the repetition now obvious enough that it looked like ritual rather than procedure. Maya stayed behind the rope, as instructed, but she was listening. She was watching the exterior hallway. She was cataloging the movement of security officers, the positioning, the way they were communicating. She was noting that Captain Volkov had given them no tactical direction beyond secure the perimeter, which was good protocol for untrained personnel, but which also meant they didn't understand what they were looking at. She was noting the single security camera in the ICU and its angle. She was noting all of this with the kind of still, methodical awareness that looked like calm compliance from the outside, but which, on the inside, felt like coming home to muscle memory that had no place in a hospital 8 months after leaving the life that required it. The rope stayed between her and the door, for now. 22 minutes into the lockdown, the security radio chatter was wrong. Maya noticed it while checking the blood pressure cuff on Mr. Holloway. The elderly man's pressure was elevated, predictable, given the circumstances, but stable. She made a note in his chart, moved to the next patient, and continued listening to the security frequency coming through the portable radio clipped to Captain Volkov's belt. He'd turned it up louder than necessary, probably to maintain the appearance of control. It had the opposite effect. Unit 2, what's your status on the north entrance? Volkov's voice, trying to sound casual and failing to land it, static. Then, north is clear. No movement. Copy that. Unit 3, east side, more static. Longer pause. When Unit 3 responded, there was something wrong with the cadence. East side holding. We've got multiple subjects moving in the parking lot. They're not approaching yet. Multiple subjects. Not one. Not an isolated incident. Maya adjusted Mrs. Kowalski's sedation drip. The elderly woman was ventilator dependent, unaware of anything happening outside her unconscious state. Maya checked the alarm settings on the monitor. Everything was optimized. She moved to the next bed. Captain Volkov was standing at the ICU entrance, his posture unchanged, but his jaw had tightened. He radioed again. All units, establish visual perimeter. Report any approach. Do not initiate contact without authorization. The responses came back with the kind of speed that suggested his officers hadn't been expecting clear direction. That was the first real problem. If you train for something, you know what to do when it happens. You don't wait for orders you should already understand. Maya was now moving through her systematic check of the 6 ICU patients, a routine she could perform in her sleep, which meant her mind was free to process other things. The hospital's south wing was visible through the exterior windows if you looked at the right angle. She didn't look directly, just peripheral awareness. Through the glass, she could see the parking lot. She could see 2 security officers positioned near the main entrance, and even from this distance, their body language was wrong. They were too close together, too focused on the front entry. Their positioning left blind spots on the west side of the building. Captain Volkov could see the same thing. Probably. He was trained police. But he was 60 feet from the actual threat zone, and he was working with hospital security, not tactical personnel. Rebecca was still at the central station, now running through patient charts with the kind of frantic energy that meant she was trying to calm herself. Dr. Amiri had stopped pacing and was now standing with one hand pressed against his thigh, staring at nothing. The respiratory therapist, his name tag said Marcus, had given up the pretense of work. He was sitting on the chair near the supplies, watching the windows like a civilian. They were watching the crisis. Maya was observing it. Unit 2, repeat your last. Volkov's voice again. He sounded different now. The authority was still there, but underneath it was the sound of someone recalibrating. Multiple subjects now approaching the south entrance. They're coordinated. Captain, these aren't random. There it was. The word coordinated changed everything. It moved the crisis from chaotic to intentional. It moved the threat from situation to manage to operation to counter. Volkov's radio discipline broke for just a moment. There was a sharp intake of breath. Then, all units fall back to secondary positions. Secure interior access points. Give me a count on those subjects. Maya was in bed 5 now. Mr. Patterson, conscious, increasingly anxious. She was checking his central line, her hands steady, her voice quiet. You're doing fine, Mr. Patterson. Everything's fine. That he knew it was a lie. His eyes were too alert. But he nodded anyway, because some lies are kinder than truth in the moment. Unit 2, respond. Subject count, static stretched. Too long. Multiple. I count 6. Maybe 8. There. Captain, they're armed. The word armed didn't echo. It didn't need to. It just settled into the ICU like a weight lowering through water. Doctor. Amiri stood up suddenly. His face had gone from pale to something worse. The color of someone realizing that the situation had just escalated beyond his frame of reference. Rebecca made a small sound. Not quite a whimper. Not quite a word. Maya finished checking Mr. Patterson's line and moved back to the central station. She was still behind the rope, still in her designated zone. But as she moved, she was noting the secondary exit behind the oxygen storage. She was thinking about the stairwell beyond it. She was thinking about how quickly 6 ICU patients could be evacuated if extraction became necessary. She was thinking like someone who had done this before. Captain Volkov stood very still, his radio in his hand, his jaw working silently. Outside, the situation was deteriorating. Inside, the rope held, but only because no one had tested it yet. The breach came through the southeast stairwell entrance at 14:58, not through the front, where security was positioned. Not through a window. Through the interior of the building, past the administrative offices on the 4th floor, down the stairwell that led directly to the basement corridor that ran parallel to the ICU. 2 gunshots. Precise. Not panicked. Then the security radio came alive with overlapping voices, all trying to speak at once, all failing to establish communication hierarchy. Shots fired. Southeast stairwell, basement level. We've got entry on the south side. They're pushing through all units converge on. Captain Volkov's voice cut through the static. All personnel get to secondary positions. Now. But secondary positions had never been clearly defined. That became obvious immediately. Doctor. Amiri started moving toward the ICU entrance. Rebecca stood up, so quickly her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. The respiratory therapist froze entirely, his body locked in place like a prey animal hoping to become invisible. Maya didn't move yet. She was listening to the sounds in the hallway, the specific acoustic signature of movement. 2 people, possibly 3, moving through the basement corridor with methodical speed. Professional pace. Not panicked. Not tactical sprint either. Controlled approach. The lights in the ICU stayed on. No emergency shutdown. That meant the threat wasn't at the main electrical panel. They didn't know the building layout well enough, or they didn't care about utilities. Captain Volkov was now in the ICU entrance, his Glock drawn, his posture low but not tactical. He was holding the weapon like someone who had qualified on it annually and nothing more. His hands were shaking, very slightly, but visible enough that Rebecca could see it, and her breathing became faster. Everyone, beds, get down, move. He was giving commands that sounded authoritative but which actually had no tactical value. Getting down beside a patient bed in an ICU wouldn't protect anyone from crossfire. It was just something to tell people to do so they wouldn't feel helpless. Maya was already moving, not toward a bed, toward the crash cart, toward the secondary equipment station, toward the space near the oxygen storage that ran along the east wall. Chun, get down, Volkov said, his voice strained. She didn't acknowledge him. She was already unlocking the code on the secure medication cabinet. Combination memorized, not looked up, and beginning to remove the portable supplies. Narcotics, antibiotics, emergency medications, everything that couldn't be left if the ICU had to be evacuated. Chun, I said, the gunshots came again. Closer, 3 this time, loud enough that the acoustic signature changed. They were in the basement corridor, very close to the ICU. Doctor. Amiri made a sound between a gasp and a sob. Rebecca was now on the floor near bed 1, but she was hyperventilating, counterproductive, dangerous to herself. The respiratory therapist hadn't moved. He was still sitting, eyes wide, waiting for something to happen to him. Maya was thinking about 6 ICU patients, all dependent, all unable to move themselves. Mr. Holloway with his freshly repaired knee, Mrs. Kowalski on a ventilator, Mr. Patterson with his central line, 3 others in varying states of post-operative dependency. The door to the ICU was still closed. Volkov was holding position in the entrance, his weapon raised, but his stance betraying that he'd never actually used it on anything except paper targets. Maya moved to the secondary exit. The fire door, the one that opened into the stairwell. She looked at Captain Volkov, a single glance, and he shook his head sharply. Stay behind the rope. She opened the door anyway. The stairwell was empty. Gray cinder block. The sound of footsteps echoing from below. The threat was moving up from the basement, but they hadn't reached this level yet. She could hear them on the stairs, still 2 or 3 floors down, but moving with steady purpose. She left the door propped open with a rubber wedge from the supply cart. Then she turned back to the ICU. Dr. Amiri. Her voice was level, not loud, not panicked, just clear. I need you to help me move the ventilator-dependent patients to isolation rooms 1 and 2. Now that he didn't respond. He was still on the floor, still in shock. Doctor. Harder. A command. Not a request. That broke something in him. The sound of authority cut through the panic. He got up, his hands shaking, but his mind starting to compartmentalize. Rebecca, I need you to disconnect the non-critical 4 lines on beds 3 and 4. Leave the central lines intact. Can you do that? Rebecca was still breathing too fast, but she nodded. Move. Maya was now doing something that shouldn't have looked natural in a hospital setting. She was clearing spaces. She was removing obstacles. She was creating a corridor of movement from the main ICU to the isolation rooms at the east end, the rooms that had secondary exits and better position for controlled exit if necessary. Marcus, the respiratory therapist, was still frozen. Marcus, get up. He didn't. He was locked. Maya moved to him in 3 steps. She wasn't gentle. Get up. Something in her voice, something clinical and absolute, forced compliance. He stood. She pointed to bed 2. You're with me. Portable ventilator now. She was already moving toward Mrs. Kowalski's bed, beginning the precise sequence of disconnecting the patient from the main ventilator and preparing the portable unit. The movements were automatic. Practiced. The kind of procedure you only move through with this kind of confidence if you've done it dozens of times. Captain Volkov was still in the entrance, his weapon still raised. He was watching the corridor door. He hadn't noticed that his authority had just been overridden by a hospital nurse, or maybe he had. Maybe he was just grateful that someone was doing something. The footsteps in the stairwell were getting closer. 1 floor below now. The acoustic signature was clearer. 2 distinct sets of footsteps, measured, coordinated. Professional approach. They would reach this level in 40 seconds. 35. Maya had Mrs. Kowalski's portable ventilator humming and ready. Dr. Amiri was helping her move the patient toward isolation room 1. Dr. Amiri's hands were still shaking, but he was moving like someone following orders from someone who knew what they were doing. 30 seconds. The basement corridor door was still closed, still locked from the inside. But the lock was standard hospital grade. It wouldn't hold against determined pressure. Maya looked at the secondary exit, at the open fire door, at the stairwell beyond it. Then she looked at Captain Volkov. When they breach, she said quietly, they're coming through that door. Your position leaves you exposed. You need to move to the south wall, low, sight line to the entrance. You also need to stop aiming at the door and lower your weapon until you actually see a target. You're telegraphing position. Volkov stared at her. His face was pale. His mind was 3 steps behind the situation. I know what I'm doing, Chun. I know, she said. It wasn't rude. It was just factual. You don't. Move. Now. 20 seconds. And for reasons he couldn't explain, maybe because she was the only person in the room who looked like they'd ever been here before, Captain Richard Volkov moved. The basement corridor breach lasted 40 seconds. 2 armed subjects came through the door with precision that was almost surgical. 1 high, 1 low. Controlled entry. They were looking for something specific, not random chaos, not panic gunfire. Tactical search pattern, Captain Volkov fired twice from his low position against the south wall. Both shots missed. Both served only to clarify that he was there and that he was armed. The subjects returned fire, 3 rounds, methodical, aimed at eliminating the threat. 1 round passed through Volkov's upper arm. Clean shot. Through muscle, not bone. He dropped the weapon and fell sideways with a sound that was half gasp, half pain. Then it stopped. The subjects hadn't continued advancing. They hadn't come further into the ICU. They'd established position in the corridor and gone silent. Waiting for something. Listening. Dr. Amiri had frozen in the process of moving Mr. Patterson. Rebecca was still on the floor. Marcus was hyperventilating. Maya was already moving. She crossed the ICU in controlled steps. Not running, not panicked, just moving with the kind of purpose that came from having a specific objective. She reached Volkov in 4 seconds, assessed the wound in 2 more, and looked at him with the kind of clinical evaluation that was separate from emotion. Through and through. Minor arterial involvement. It's survivable if we control bleeding and avoid infection. She was already pulling the pressure bandage from the crash cart. Stay here. Stay low. Don't fire again unless you see them. Chun, his voice was strained with pain. She was already moving away from him. She went to the isolation room where Dr. Amiri was with Mr. Patterson. She moved the patient's bed with 1 hand, smooth motion, no strain visible, and positioned it behind the reinforced structure of the ICU frame. She checked the blood pressure, noted the elevation, and made a tactical assessment of visibility from the corridor. Then she moved to the fire exit she'd left propped open. She checked it, closed it quietly, locked it from the inside. The subjects in the corridor wouldn't come through the main ICU entrance now. They'd established a holding position, which meant they were waiting for reinforcement or for something else to happen. The secondary exit was now just a position she'd controlled. She was systematizing the space like someone reading a tactical blueprint. Dr. Amiri was watching her, really watching her, not processing shock anymore, processing reality. How did you? He started. Quiet, she said. Not harsh, just directive. She was listening to the silence from the corridor. The subjects had gone completely still. That meant they were either communicating silently through hand signals or they were waiting for orders from somewhere else. She moved back to the central station and picked up the hospital phone. She dialed the main administrative line, not 911, not security dispatch, just the internal line. It was ringing. Captain Volkov was watching from his position against the wall. His arm was bleeding through the pressure bandage. He was pale, and he was looking at Maya with the kind of expression that people get when they realize they're missing something important. A voice answered the phone. Probably someone from administration who had been monitoring the radio chatter from a safe location. Patient Safety Office, she said quietly into the phone. This is Nurse Chun, ICU. I need an immediate status update on police response and ETA for active armed support. The person on the other end was trying to explain that they didn't have that information. You have dispatch on the main line, Maya said. Her voice was still level, still calm, still carrying the weight of someone who expected to be obeyed. Pull it. Tell me ETA for tactical response. There was a pause. Then the person came back with an answer. 2 minutes for police tactical unit. 5 minutes for federal response if this escalated beyond local jurisdiction. Copy. Maya hung up. She turned back to the ICU. She looked at Dr. Amiri, still frozen. She looked at Rebecca, still on the floor. She looked at Marcus, who had finally stopped hyperventilating. She looked at Captain Volkov, bleeding, watching her with an expression that was starting to look like recognition without understanding. And then she moved to the secondary storage near the oxygen unit. She unlocked a cabinet that Captain Volkov didn't even know existed, because it wasn't labeled on the regular hospital inventory. She opened it, reached to the back, and removed a tactical radio. Encrypted frequency, military grade, the kind of equipment that had absolutely no business being in a hospital's oxygen storage. She clipped it to her waistband, hidden by the line of her scrubs. Captain Volkov's eyes followed the movement. The recognition was starting to crystallize. The pieces were beginning to arrange themselves into a pattern that his mind couldn't quite accept, but which his gut was already acknowledging that he said nothing. But his hand came away from his wound. His jaw tightened, and very carefully, without moving anything else, he looked directly at Maya. Who are you? His voice was barely a whisper. She didn't answer. She just met his gaze for a moment, not cold, not defensive, just still. The way someone looks when there's someone you're not supposed to know about. Then she turned back to the corridor and listened to the silence waiting there. The subjects in the corridor were waiting for communication. Maya knew this because professionals always wait for confirmation before executing the next phase of an operation. They would have a timeline, a signal, maybe a radio check-in at a specific interval. She had approximately 90 seconds before that signal came through. She moved to the east wall of the ICU, positioning herself where the corridor door was no longer in her direct line of sight, but where she could still hear if anyone moved. The isolation rooms where she'd placed the ventilator-dependent patients had acoustic properties that would muffle external sound enough that they wouldn't hear what she was about to do. She activated the encrypted radio. The frequency came alive with the sound of active tactical net. Not hospital security, not local police dispatch. Military-grade encrypted channel. There were voices on it already, calm, professional, using brevity codes she recognized from another life. Ghosthawk, this is Overwatch. You are green for comms. She pressed the transmit button. Her voice was different now. Still controlled. Still calm. But it carried a weight that had been absent before. Ghosthawk is green. I have 6 subjects in approach vector, coordinated entry, military-grade weapons. 2 in ICU corridor, for instaging. Building is civilian healthcare facility. Non-combatants present. There was a pause. The kind that happens when operational status is being verified at higher command levels. Ghosthawk, stand by. We're pulling your file. What's your tactical assessment? Coordinated entry suggests direct intelligence on facility layout. They're not searching. They're executing a specific objective. The subjects in the corridor are holding position and waiting for external signal. I count 4 additional subjects in parking structure, maintaining perimeter. This is organized. This is not random. The radio crackled. Someone else came onto the net. Different voice. Higher authority markers in the cadence. Ghosthawk, I'm Major Derek Hollis, Naval Special Operations Command. I have your file open. You're currently in civilian employment status as of 8 months ago. Are you declaring operational status? Maya's eyes were still on the corridor door. Her hand was steady on the radio. Behind her, Dr. Amiri had stopped moving entirely. He was just watching. Processing. Affirmative. I'm declaring full operational status. I have wounded civilian personnel present. Security captain, 1 gunshot wound, upper right arm. Non-critical. Request you coordinate police response. I need active armed support on hospital perimeter in next 90 seconds, or the subjects will establish secure perimeter themselves. Copy that. Police tactical is en route. ETA 2 minutes. We're scrambling federal response from the field office downtown. ETA 5 minutes. You're green to engage if tactical situation escalates, but maintain defensive posture until backup is present. Can you secure the immediate area? Affirmative. I can secure the ICU and establish secondary position, but I need you to confirm. What is the objective? Why are they here? The pause was longer this time. When Major Hollis came back, his voice was different. Lower. The way it gets when someone is delivering information that changes the operational calculus. Ghosthawk, we don't have full intelligence yet, but the subjects in your location are connected to a federal investigation into an internal trafficking network. We believe someone at that hospital is part of the supply chain. The subjects are here to neutralize that asset before federal charges can be filed. We're trying to establish which staff member is the target. Can you stand by? Maya said. She clicked off the radio. She was thinking now about hospital staff, about who had come in over the last week with new money, who had taken more breaks than usual, who had looked different, who had made phone calls they shouldn't have been making. She thought about a pharmacy technician named David. 3rd shift, made less than $30,000 a year, had shown up Monday with a new watch. A good watch, the kind that costs more than his car. She thought about how the subjects had come in through the basement, through the corridor that led past the pharmacy. She clicked the radio back on. Major Hollis, I think I have your asset. Pharmacy staff member, name of David. He's not on this shift, but his employee file is in administration. I can confirm if you need verification. That's good intelligence, Ghosthawk. We'll add that to the database. Stay in your position, and he was interrupted by a sound from the corridor. Footsteps. Specific rhythm. One of the subjects was moving, not advancing further into the ICU. Moving toward the pharmacy access door, the connection between the subjects and David was more direct than a simple supply chain. They needed something from him. Or they needed him removed before he could talk to federal investigators. Maya set the radio down on the central station. She looked at Dr. Amiri. "Stay with the patients," she said. "Don't open any doors. Don't engage if anyone tries to come through. Just stay low and stay present with them. Can you do that?" He nodded. His face was pale, but he understood the assignment. He'd moved into a role he understood. Caregiver, protector, something within his frame of reference. Captain Volkov was still against the south wall, his arm bleeding more now. He was watching everything, understanding nothing, but starting to piece things together from the context. He said her name like a question. "Chun." She didn't answer him. She was already moving toward the isolation rooms to check on the ventilator-dependent patients, to make sure they were positioned where they needed to be if extraction became necessary, to ensure that no matter what happened next, the people under her care could survive it. The encrypted radio crackled again with Major Hollis's voice, but she didn't answer it yet. She was thinking tactically now. Operating. The hospital nurse was gone. What was left was older than 8 months. What was left had been waiting in this body the whole time, just quiet enough that a security captain could tell her to stay behind a rope, and she could smile and nod and comply. The rope was about to dissolve. Captain Volkov watched Maya move through the ICU with the kind of precision that made it clear she was no longer just a nurse managing a crisis. She was executing something. A plan. A sequence. Something she'd already run through her mind multiple times before anything had actually happened. She stopped at the central station and picked up the phone again. This time she called security dispatch directly. The voice that answered was panicked. There was gunfire. There was a breach. "This is Nurse Chun, ICU. I need you to shut down access to the pharmacy from the basement corridor. Now, every door. Lock them down and do not let anyone through regardless of what they tell you. Can you do that?" The voice on the other end tried to explain that security couldn't reach that location. Then call maintenance. Call whoever's in the basement. Tell them to secure the pharmacy access immediately. Do it now. She hung up. She didn't wait for confirmation. She was already moving toward the ICU entrance where the corridor door was still locked, but still holding under the tactical pressure of 2 trained subjects waiting on the other side. Captain Volkov called her name. "Chun, you need to stay low," she said, not looking at him, just speaking like someone giving a directive to someone who would follow it. "Pressure on the wound. Don't bleed out. Medical staff are moving patients to safer positions. You're staying here to monitor corridor entrance. You see movement at that door, you call out. You don't engage. You don't fire. You observe and report. Can you do that?" He didn't answer immediately. He was processing the fact that she'd just given him an assignment, that she'd redirected his authority into something useful but subordinate. "Chun, Captain," still not looking at him. "Can you do that?" Something in her voice, something that had nothing to do with hospital rank, settled the question. Yes. She moved to the ICU entrance, staying outside the direct sight line of the corridor. She activated the radio again, but she didn't press transmit immediately. She was listening to what was happening outside. The subjects in the corridor had received some kind of signal. There was movement, not toward the ICU, lateral movement, toward the pharmacy access. She pressed transmit. "Major Hollis, subjects are moving toward pharmacy access point. I've called for building maintenance to secure basement access, but I need police response to establish perimeter immediately. The subjects are consolidating, not engaging further. That suggests they have a primary objective that doesn't involve direct confrontation. Copy Ghosthawk. Police tactical is 60 seconds out. FBI field office is sending agents from 2 locations. You're cleared to establish secondary defensive position, but maintain minimal escalation. These subjects may be part of a larger network. We need them alive for interrogation if possible." "Understood. I'm establishing inner perimeter. Hospital staff will be moved to secure locations. Police can establish external perimeter when they arrive." She ended the transmission. She turned back to Dr. Amiri. "How many patients are still in the main ICU?" 2. "Mr. Holloway and Rebecca's still on the floor, but she's with us. Move Mr. Holloway to isolation room 3. It's at the far end of the east wing, protected by structural mass. Move him there now. Rebecca goes with him. You stay with them. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except police in full tactical gear. Understand?" "Yes." "I moved." He moved. She walked to where Rebecca was still on the floor, shaking. She didn't help her up. She just offered her hand and spoke directly. Get up. Go with Dr. Amiri. You're moving to the next room. You're going to help monitor Mr. Holloway. You're going to sit with him and make sure his vitals stay stable, and you're not going to panic. Can you do that? Rebecca took her hand and stood. The act of being given something specific to do, something within her competence, seemed to stabilize her. She nodded. Good. Go. Marcus was still by the secondary ventilator. He looked like he wanted to disappear. Marcus, you're with me. You're going to help me establish equipment redundancy in the isolation rooms. Portable ventilator, suction, oxygen, everything. Now that he stood up without arguing. Captain Volkov was watching all of this from his position against the south wall. His arm was bleeding, but the pressure bandage was holding. His face was pale, but his eyes were tracking Maya's movements, and something was crystallizing in his expression. Not panic, not confusion, recognition. The recognition of someone who had just realized they'd been taking orders from a security captain when they should have been taking orders from someone whose rank existed in a completely different system. Maya moved through the ICU with Marcus, gathering equipment. As they moved, she was talking, not to Marcus, but into the radio clipped to her waistband. Establishing 3 isolated patient zones. All non-critical staff consolidated. I have 1 wounded security officer on site. Non-critical wound. Stable, but in need of medical attention. Request police send medical support through the north entrance. That's the least compromised access point. South and east entrances are visual lines to subject positions. Copy, Major Hollis said. Police tactical is now 30 seconds from building perimeter. Subjects are still maintaining position. Affirmative. Holding in corridor. No movement toward ICU for the last 40 seconds. They're waiting for something, or they've been ordered to hold. Understood. You're maintaining civilian protection priority, right? No escalation on your end. She looked at Dr. Amiri moving Mr. Holloway. Looked at Rebecca helping stabilize the patient. Looked at Marcus connecting portable equipment with the kind of focus that suggested he was glad to have something concrete to do. Affirmative. Civilians are being secured. Police will have clear entry once they're established outside. Good. Ghosthawk, I want you to know. Your file shows 8 months civilian status. That means you're operating outside official capacity here. If anyone asks, this was improvisation under duress. Not official operational deployment. Clear. She understood. She was off the books. She was acting as a civilian who happened to have military training. She was not acting as an active federal asset. That distinction would matter later, when paperwork was filed and statements were taken. Clear, sir. I'm operating as private citizen utilizing emergency competencies. Nothing more. Roger that. Police are now establishing exterior perimeter. Subjects are holding. You've got this, Ghosthawk. Medical support coming through north entrance in approximately 90 seconds. Hang tight. She ended the transmission. She looked at Captain Volkov one more time. He was still watching her. Still trying to reconcile what he knew about hospital hierarchy with what he was observing about actual hierarchy. Captain, she said, you did good work maintaining position. Your awareness kept people alive. When police arrive, you report to them. You tell them what you saw. You don't mention me or any of this radio communication. You tell them there was a nurse who helped move patients to safety. That's all they need to know. Can you do that? He didn't argue. He was past arguing. Yes. Thank you. She moved to the isolation rooms where the ventilator-dependent patients were now stable, positioned, protected. She checked vitals. Everything was holding. The patients were sedated or unconscious. They wouldn't remember the fear. They would just wake up in an isolation room and be told that there'd been a security incident and they were being kept for observation. That was a story their minds could accept. In the corridor, the subjects were still holding position. Still waiting. Maya sat down at the central station, her encrypted radio silent now, her hands folded, her breathing even. She was waiting too. Waiting for police to establish external perimeter. Waiting for the tactical situation to resolve. Waiting for the moment when federal agents would arrive and she could hand authority back to people whose names were in official files. Until then, the rope was gone. The hierarchy had inverted, and everyone in the ICU, including the security captain bleeding against the south wall, understood exactly who had been underestimated. The police tactical unit was still 30 seconds from internal position when Maya heard the first sound from the pharmacy IT was a muffled impact, the sound of a locked door being tested by something heavier than a shoulder. The subjects in the corridor had stopped waiting. Something had triggered escalation. She was on her feet without appearing to stand. No urgency, just motion. Captain Volkov's eyes tracked her movement. "Chun, the police, are seconds away," she said. "But David is 2 locked doors away from them. The subjects won't wait for police to establish perimeter. They'll execute. That's not your problem. That's not." But she was already moving toward the isolation rooms. She opened each one, looked at the patients, made a tactical assessment. All stable, protected by structure and distance. Dr. Amiri and Rebecca were with them. They would hold. She went to the cabinet she'd unlocked earlier, the one with the tactical radio. She opened the lower shelf. Behind the spare oxygen canisters was a Sig Sauer P226, secured in a mag-release holster. Military issue, not hospital issue. Not anything Captain Volkov's mind could process as existing in this space. She drew the weapon with the kind of smooth motion that suggested muscle memory from a life that had nothing to do with hospitals. She checked the chamber, confirmed the round, and moved toward the ICU entrance. "Chun, what are you, Captain? Head down. Police are 2 seconds from corridor breach." She didn't wait for his response. The ICU entrance door was still locked from the inside. She unlocked it. She didn't open it yet. She was listening. The subjects in the corridor had heard the pharmacy door being tested. They were repositioning. One of them was moving toward the pharmacy access. The other was holding position at the ICU entrance. She opened the door precisely 18 inches. Enough to see into the corridor without creating a target profile. The subject nearest to her was facing the pharmacy access point, his weapon held low but ready. His partner was 20 feet behind him, also facing the pharmacy. Both subjects had auditory focus on the pharmacy and visual focus on the corridor beyond. Neither of them were covering the ICU entrance. Maya moved through the door. She was inside the corridor before either subject fully registered that something had changed. The nearest subject turned. Reaction time, half second, and she was already speaking in the kind of calm, authoritative tone that makes training respond before decision can catch up. "Federal operative, stand down." It was a lie. A tactical lie. The kind used when you have maybe 2 seconds before someone decides whether to shoot. The subject's weapon started to rise. She didn't wait for him to complete the movement. She moved laterally, smooth, controlled, no panic, and cleared the line of fire. The second subject was already recognizing threat and acquiring target, but she was already in motion toward the pharmacy access door. She didn't engage them. She just moved past them with the kind of controlled speed that suggested absolute certainty about the next objective. The pharmacy access door was reinforced, but it wasn't holding. Someone, probably maintenance, had locked it from the inside, but the subjects had been testing it methodically. Another 10 seconds, and it would break. Maya reached it, unlocked it from the outside using the master keycard she'd snagged from the ICU office. The door opened. Inside, she found David pressed against the back wall of the pharmacy, a phone in his shaking hand, his eyes wide. "Don't move," she said. "Don't speak. Just come with me. Now." He didn't move. Fear had locked him in place. She reached him in 2 steps. She didn't ask for compliance again. She grabbed his arm with her left hand, the one not holding the weapon, and moved him back toward the door. His body was rigid. Panicked. She spoke directly into his ear. "You move fast. You move quiet. You stay behind me. If you deviate or slow down, you'll die. Do you understand?" He nodded. His body understood even if his mind was still in shock. The corridor was chaos now. The 2 subjects had made a decision about the armed woman in the hospital. One was engaging the pharmacy entrance. One was radioing for support. She had maybe 5 seconds before they realized she was extracting their target. She moved through the corridor with David behind her, and the subject nearest to her acquired target. She saw the intention form before the movement did, just the shift in weight, the realignment of the weapon. She turned and fired, not at him. At the light fixture above his head. The ceramic exploded. It wasn't a killing shot. It was a distraction shot. It was buying time measured in half seconds. She kept moving. Behind her, the second subject was still radioing, but now he was also moving into the corridor. She could hear his footsteps, could hear his partner calling out, could feel the moment when the tactical situation shifted from extract target to engage threat. The ICU entrance was 30 feet away. She was moving at controlled speed, not running, not panicked, just moving with the kind of purpose that looked like competence and didn't waste energy on unnecessary motion. David was behind her, his breathing ragged, his legs almost not functioning. 20 feet. She heard the gunshot, not aimed at her, but coming close enough that the acoustic shock was real. The subject was panicking. That was good. Panic meant inaccuracy. 10 feet. She could see Captain Volkov in the ICU entrance, his face white, his wounded arm forgotten. He was seeing something that his mind couldn't reconcile. A nurse, armed, moving through gunfire, moving like someone for whom this was familiar. She reached the ICU entrance. She pushed David inside. He stumbled, fell against the central station. She turned and locked the door behind them, not because it would hold long, just because it would slow the subjects down enough for police to arrive. She stood for just a moment with her hand on the lock, breathing, steady, controlled. Then she lowered the weapon. That's when Captain Volkov saw it. The moment when her control wavered just enough for pain to register. Her right side, a red line along her ribs that had been hidden by her scrubs until she'd moved a certain way. A graze. Close enough that the bullet had torn fabric and skin. Close enough that she'd bled into her uniform. She didn't touch it. She just stood there, weapon lowered, hand on the lock, breathing steady, and waited. The sounds in the corridor were getting louder. Police were entering from the basement. The subjects were being contained. The tactical situation was collapsing into resolution. Dr. Amiri emerged from isolation room 1. He saw David on the floor. He saw Maya with blood along her ribs. He saw Captain Volkov staring at her like she was someone he'd never actually seen before. Get him to observation, Maya said. Her voice hadn't changed. Still level. Still calm. Medical assessment. He's civilian, but he's going to need processing. Police will have questions. Then she turned and walked to the nearest chair and sat down. The radio crackled. Major Hollis's voice. Ghosthawk, we have visual of subjects. Police are establishing custody. What's your status? She pressed transmit. Ghosthawk is green. Objective secured. 1 civilian extracted. I'm taking a chair for a moment. Copy that. Medical support is entering ICU now. You receiving support? She looked at Captain Volkov. Looked at Dr. Amiri. Looked at the door where police officers in tactical gear were now moving into position. Negative, she said. Just civilians here. I'm fine. I'm standing down. She turned off the radio. She set it on the chair beside her. She looked at her ribs where blood had begun to seep through the fabric more visibly now that the adrenaline was receding. The cost of the choice had manifested. Real, physical, earned, and sitting there in the ICU, bleeding quietly into her uniform, Maya looked like exactly what she was. Someone who had just saved lives by being willing to sacrifice her own. The federal agents arrived in civilian clothes at 15:47.2 of them. A woman with blonde hair pulled back tight, moving with the kind of economical precision that marked operational background. A man in his 50s with the bearing of someone who'd been making decisions about other people's lives for decades. They didn't have badges visible. They just had the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. They went directly to the ICU. They didn't stop to brief police. They didn't wait for hospital administration. They just came through the secured entrance like they owned it. And Captain Volkov's eyes tracked them with the understanding that his authority had just been superseded by something higher. The woman looked at Maya first. Just a glance. A confirmation. Then she looked away. That small gesture, the deliberate avoidance of prolonged eye contact, was recognition. The kind used when you know someone and you need to pretend you don't. The man approached Captain Volkov. Captain, I'm Special Agent Morrison, FBI. I need to get a statement from you about the security response and the civilian nurse who assisted with patient movement. Volkov's eyes had already drifted back to Maya. She was sitting in the same chair where she'd sat down, her shirt unbuttoned just enough that you could see the field dressing someone had applied to her ribs. A medic from the police tactical unit had done it, professionally, quietly, without asking too many questions about how she'd gotten shot. Volkov started. He stopped. He was trying to find words for something that didn't fit into any language he knew. She secured the patients. She moved them to safe positions. She knew what she was doing. She did, Agent Morrison said. It wasn't a question. Can you give me a full account of her actions during the incident? As Volkov began recounting what had happened, The positioning, the precision, the way she'd somehow known things that shouldn't have been knowable. Maya stood up. Slowly. The movement was careful but not hesitant. The kind of movement someone makes when they're managing pain but not acknowledging it. The female agent's eyes found her again, and this time they held. A single nod. Minimal. Barely visible. Maya moved toward the isolation rooms where Dr. Amiri was monitoring the patients. As she passed, she touched Captain Volkov's shoulder. Very briefly, very lightly. "Thank you," she said, "for following orders when it mattered." He looked up at her. The confusion was still there, but underneath it was something else. Understanding. The recognition that he'd been in the presence of something far outside his frame of reference, and that he'd survived it because he'd known when to stop being the authority and start being competent. "Who are you?" he asked. Not a demand, just a question. "A nurse," she said, "who had another job before this one," but she didn't wait for his response. She went into isolation room 1, where Drive Amiri was checking Mr. Holloway's vitals. Everything was stable. The patient was sedated, unaware of anything except the strange dreams of post-operative medication. "Patients are stable," Dr. Amiri said. He was looking at her ribs, looking at the blood that had seeped through the makeshift dressing. "You need a hospital bed. Real treatment." "I need to finish the shift," she said. "Check on everyone. Make sure protocols are established for the next 8 hours." "Maya, you've been shot." "Grazed," she corrected. "There's a difference. And I need to make sure there's continuity of care. That's what a nurse does." She moved to Mrs. Kowalski's bedside. The ventilator was functioning normally. Oxygen saturation was good. Heart rate was stable. She made notes in the patient's chart. Actual clinical notes, not anything that referenced the incident. Just medical assessment and protocol. When she emerged from the isolation rooms, Agent Morrison was waiting. The female agent had moved to where David was being processed. He was shaking, being given water, being told that federal protection would be arranged, that his testimony would protect him, that he was going to be okay. Agent Morrison gestured to the hallway outside the ICU. Maya followed him out. The corridor smelled like cordite and hospital disinfectant. The pharmacy access door was still open. Police were processing it. Photographs, measurements, evidence marking. The subjects were gone, removed, already in custody somewhere. Agent Morrison closed the ICU door behind them and spoke quietly. "Major Hollis briefed me on your actions," he said. "You went outside your authorized parameters." "I was off duty," Maya said. "I was a civilian responding to an active threat. You were a civilian with access to secure military equipment and encrypted federal communications. I was a civilian trying to keep patients alive." Agent Morrison studied her for a moment. Then he nodded very slightly. "That's the statement we'll use. You're a private citizen. You had prior emergency medical training. During the crisis, you organized patient protection and assisted in civilian evacuation. You were injured in the course of that activity. That's all we have. What about the radio? The weapon? Doesn't exist. You were never armed. You never used military communications. You used hospital resources and good judgment. The subjects are in custody. The case moves forward. You disappeared.it was the kind of operational cleanup that meant she'd been expected. That someone in federal hierarchy had known she was in this hospital. That this hadn't been coincidence. "How long did you know?" she asked. "About your employment here?" "About 2 months after you took the job. We run backgrounds on all incoming medical staff in federal facilities. The flag came up. We flagged you for operational backup if a situation escalated. We didn't expect to need it this soon. And if I hadn't been here, then innocent people would probably be dead and a federal witness would be executed in custody. So I'd say the timing is what it is." He handed her a business card. It had nothing on it except a phone number. "You're cleared for separation from civilian employment. You're also cleared for optional reactivation if you want to continue operational work. Either way, the hospital doesn't need to know anything beyond what I said. You're a good nurse. You also happen to be something else. Both things can be true." Maya took the card. She didn't look at it, just held it in her hand. "I need to check on my patients," she said. "Of course. Medical evaluation first. Then you can process out. You won't be coming back for the next shift." He said it like a fact, like it had already been decided. And she understood. The hospital knew nothing, but federal authority had already moved to extract her. By tomorrow, there would be a record of her taking emergency medical leave. By next week, there would be paperwork for separation. By next month, No one at the hospital would remember her except as the quiet nurse who'd helped during the security incident. She went back into the ICU. Captain Volkov was still there, his arm properly bandaged now by actual medical personnel. He was giving a written statement to a police officer. He looked up as she passed, and for just a moment, their eyes met. She gave him the smallest nod he understood. Whoever she was, whatever she'd been doing, it was gone now. Back into whatever shadow she'd emerged from that doctor. Amiri approached her as she reached the central station. The hospital is going to want an incident report. From you, as the nurse on duty. I'll file it, she said. Standard patient care continuity report. Nothing else. Maya, the police are asking about how you knew tactical positioning. How you knew. Tell them I was trained as an EMT before I became an RN. Tell them I did field work with rural emergency response. Tell them I read a lot about tactical medicine. Tell them whatever makes sense for someone who's a good nurse and happens to read medical journals. She was already pulling up her shift log on the computer, documenting patient vitals, creating the paperwork that would show she'd done her job, that she'd been competent, that she'd followed protocol. By the time the next shift started, the ICU would look normal. The patients would be stable. The incident would be a thing that happened to the space, not something that remained in it. She changed her shirt in the staff locker room. She disposed of the bloodied one in the medical waste. She rebandaged her ribs using supplies from the trauma kit. Proper bandaging, medical grade, the kind that would hold for 3 days until it could be properly assessed. When she emerged from the locker room, the female agent was waiting. There's a car outside the north entrance, the agent said. It's for you. Medical evaluation at a federal clinic. Then we'll process your separation from civilian employment. What about my apartment? My things. We'll be fine. You can arrange for personal effects to be shipped or retrieved. For now, you're just leaving. That's the cleanest exit. It was the language of operational extraction, the language of someone leaving a life behind. Maya had heard it before, in different contexts, different times, when she'd been the one doing the extracting. She picked up her jacket from her locker. She didn't say goodbye to Dr. Amiri or Rebecca or Captain Volkov. There was no point. In a way, she'd already left the moment the federal agents arrived. She walked through the hospital corridors, past the pharmacy, past the administrative offices, past the break room where nurses and technicians sat eating lunch and not knowing anything had changed about the world they inhabited. The north entrance was quiet. There was a black sedan parked in the emergency zone. No siren, no markings, just a car waiting for someone who needed to leave. She got in. As they pulled away from the hospital, she watched the building shrink in the rear window. The rope, the hierarchy, the careful construction of a life as a rookie nurse. All of it collapsing back into what it had always been, a cover, a pause, a version of invisibility that had its own form of power. Behind her, in the ICU, Captain Volkov would file his report. He would tell the truth about a nurse who'd acted like someone trained for crisis. He would wonder for the rest of his career who she actually was. And he would never know for certain. That was the quiet ending. That was the cost of authority reversal. Not that it was revealed, but that it was recognized by a handful of people and then erased from record. The rope was gone. But no one was supposed to talk about what had been on the other side of it. Maya Chun was no longer a rookie nurse, and Ghosthawk was no longer an underestimated person in a hospital. She was simply someone who had been both, briefly, and who now existed in the space between those identities. Real, credible, but officially forgotten. The car drove on through the evening light.